Hi, my name is Megan Sweet, an author. I wrote a book last year, and we'll talk a lot about that book today, but it's called An Educator's Guide for Using Your Three Eyes, How to Apply Intellect, Insight, and Intuition to Promote Personal and School-Wide Transformation. That book was born out of 25 years in education. I started out as a teacher, and then I was a transformation leader as an assistant principal at an elementary school in East Oakland that we converted from being one of the most struggling schools to one of the most successful schools in the district. I've since gone on to lead other school, district, and state level transformations, mostly in California, helping to create new schools, helping to merge schools together, sometimes even close schools. I also helped at the statewide level when California changed its funding system to the one that we have now, to the local control funding formula. So I have a lot of experience in the educational sector with lots of different kinds of people, from parents to teachers to students to superintendents and state leaders. I'm also a mother. I'm a single mom of an amazing 10-year-old son who is the light of my life. And finally, I'm a mindfulness maven. I'm a big believer in mindfulness. That'll come through in my presentation today, but also in the work that I do. Mindfulness to me is a great entry point to a lot of the most important transformational work we have to do in education. So as I was in education for so many years, what I came to realize is that in a lot of ways we've been doing our work wrong. We've been focusing on the wrong work. We focus a lot on these external elements of how to create change in schools, such as curriculum and textbooks and things like that. And while those are important, I actually think that the people part is more important. Education is a social venture, and so we really need to work on the people part before we can really start to make any other transformations. So that's why I wrote my book. Essentially, we all have parts of ourselves that we feel good about. We have parts of our education system that we feel good about and parts that we want to change, but we don't always use all the tools at our disposal to be able to create that change. And again, we tend to focus on these external manifestations of what's not working in schools, or things we can fix about ourselves, rather than the internal things such as bias or limiting beliefs or the issues in our social structure and the inequities in our system. Instead of addressing those, we address the external elements of those, such as achievement gaps, low test scores, things like that. Those are important, but to me, those are symptoms, and we really need to get to the cause. And really the cause is that we don't see things as they are, but we see them as we are. And we often aren't even aware of the lenses or the ways that we move through the world and how we see ourselves and we see other people. We're not aware of the beliefs that we have that are either limiting us or helping us be successful. We're often not aware or not able to see or willing to see the biases we have about our students or about our peers or about parents, and how those are limiting the opportunities for the students that we've come to serve. So we really need to start there first before we do anything else. We need to start to get a handle on what's there and how that's influencing us in both impacting our personal success, but also the success of our students. So I came up with a theory for that. And basically, my theory says that we need to learn to see with three eyes rather than one. So intellect is the logical thinking and reasoning part of our lenses and our minds, and it's the one in education we tend to lean on the most heavily. And there's nothing wrong with intellect, except for that it has its own failings and it's limited. So we need to also then employ the second eye, which is insight. And insight is deep understanding of a person or thing. It's our way of being able to know ourselves and our own experiences, our cultural background, and also our lived experiences in life. How are things impacting the way that we show up? So that's insight. And the third is intuition, which is really knowledge based on instinct or feeling. So it's learning to connect with a part of our knowledge and our knowing that resides below the kind of busy thinking of our frontal cortex of our thinking brains. But it's learning to connect mind and body, mind and heart, and come from a little bit more of a centered and grounded space. So those are the three lenses. When you put them together, it somewhat creates something like three-dimensional seeing. So it's like taking a flat, fuzzy image, like a 3D image, and what happens when you put on those 3D glasses, suddenly they gain a level of depth and clarity that there isn't when you're seeing it without those lenses on. And that's really what as my premise for school change, is that we need to learn to start seeing with this depth of clarity, both ourselves as well as our education settings. And when we can do that, then the areas for change and improvement become much more transparent and easier to know what to do next. This is how I propose you create that change. And so in my process, I believe that to create change in our school settings, we need to work on ourselves as well as on our system. So you'll see that I have this cycle here. And the cycle starts with self-work first. We always need to start with working on ourselves first. When we start to work on ourselves, worry about these offshoots in a moment. Let's just look at the cycle for a moment. We start to work on ourselves and we get a greater sense of self and self-compassion through looking at ourselves through these three eyes. That sense of self and self-compassion leads to our ability to enter into and stay in difficult conversations more. We're able to face ourselves, acknowledge the limiting beliefs we have about ourselves or others, or start to see our patterns because there isn't so much judgment or criticism because it's coming from a place of compassion and self-love. If we can do that, that enables us to be ready to do the schoolwork. And the schoolwork then begins with establishing a culture of trust and accountability within the staff, between teachers and parents, between school leaders and their community, at every level between teachers and their students. But when you create that culture of trust and accountability, it creates a space where there's safety and community enough to be able to actually collaborate and do some real transformation. So if we want to create a change in an educational setting, we need to be able to have that trust and accountability so that we can collaborate and work together. And we do that, we can create those transformations. And the learnings we get about doing that work leads us to deeper understanding of ourselves and how we're showing up. The second eye, the insight really shows up there. And on you go in this kind of not ever going cycle of self-work and schoolwork, and they influence each other. You'll see off to the side, the self-work also leads to personal development and empowerment. And the schoolwork leads to higher quality and inclusive learning spaces. So through doing this cycle of constantly working on seeing ourselves through the three eyes and then using that perspective to help us to get deeper into knowing ourselves and knowing our settings, we also then can start to have some real shifts in our personal lives and in our school communities. And those shifts happen through a cycle of inquiry. So this is a cycle of inquiry. I call it creating change with heart. So because it really is love-based and love-centered. It's not without judgment or blame. The cycle of inquiry starts with a getting curious phase. When you get curious, you just start to look at your data, whether it's about yourself. So a lot of the insight is there. Yourself, your patterns, your behaviors, but also could be student data. It could be interpersonal interactions between students and staff at a school site. That's pretty variable. But we start to get some data. And once we get that data, then we can start to notice some of those patterns. So once we have some information to look at, we can see what some of those patterns are and start to get curious about what might be there. So why are those patterns showing up? What do they have to tell us about either how we're talking to ourselves or interacting for ourselves, or the areas of needed improvement in our school or classroom or larger setting? Once we notice that, then we can start to change the story. So we pick one or two areas that we want to change or shift. So it's about our personal selves. It could be that we notice that we're always actually undermining ourselves through the way we talk to others. Or if we're talking about an educational setting, we learn that actually there's this profound area of inequity happening with our students of color, and that we want to start to change the story for them in their school setting. And in that change the story, we identify some things we want to do to have it be different. So we identify our intervention. In the act phase, we act that out. We do the intervention, we start to make some of those changes. And then after 6 weeks or so, we check in on our results and we celebrate what we've done. Even if we haven't accomplished what we wanted, the act of actually trying to create change is enough of a place to celebrate. And there's also a lot of things to learn and get ready for before we start that cycle again. So again, like there's a self-work, schoolwork cycle. Those self-work and schoolwork cycles get played out through this cycle of inquiry. As I said, I wrote a book about it. It's An Educator's Guide for Using Your Three Eyes. And to me, the book is really a very large theory of action about how I think we need to create change in educational settings. It absolutely has my personal story there as an example, but it also is built on my 25 years in the classroom, in the field, doing this work, as well as my doctoral research in creating change in educational settings. So it's informed by all of those things. And it talks a lot about how I think we could create change in our settings. So it's one that I think is really a supportive space for us to do this work. And I think it's the way that we need to start to create new change in our educational settings. And I'm ready to go deeper. So I do write a blog. It's on my website. I have two podcasts that I do. One is called The Awakening Educator, and that's a podcast that I do with one of my colleagues. And we look at topics in education from policy to practice over the course of 3 or 4 different podcasts. So it's an in-depth look at issues around education. We've talked about history already. Right now we're in a topic about immigration policy and how that's changing under the new administration. Next, we'll be talking about food and trauma and all sorts of different really cool topics in education. The other one is the Your 3 Eyes podcast, and that really is about the 3 eyes that I talked about here, but ways that it shows up in real life for educators and adults and humans, just so we can start to see that those 3 eyes, those 3 lenses are really powerful tools, and so we explore that topic together. I also have a lot of free downloads there. I've created some courses, and I'd like to do more of them. One is the Beliefs Lab. That's how you start to understand the things that are underneath through insight, those beliefs that are driving us. The cycle is what I plan to create, which is really about how to do that self-work, schoolwork cycle together. How to do a change in yourself while also changing your educational setting, because educators are pretty antsy people and they want to get going right away. And also I can offer a weekend mindfulness course for leaders. I'm certified through the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute to teach a mindfulness course. And I think it's a really great foundation for anybody who's in the classroom or in a school leadership or district leadership setting to start to connect with mindfulness and to understand how it can really be an impactful way to start and create change. I also offer personal coaching, and it's one of the things that I think is really important for this work. Teachers and school leaders, they're very lonely jobs, and one of the ways that I think that they could most profoundly benefit from the information I have to offer, but even just for themselves, is to have the access to a coach, someone to come in, watch them teach, who's not evaluating them, to come in and work with a principal. I've coached a lot of principals and district leaders, giving them a space to talk where they're free from any other responsibilities and just have the luxury of someone holding space for them and helping them to problem solve professional challenges as well as personal ones. I think that kind of coaching really helps to help educators be better and more intentional in the classroom.